I was initially hesitant to do it, but they've been pressuring me to do it for about 2 years. I figured, well, there are going to be 22,000 people there, so we can throw in some new songs maybe. However, we ended up playing only old songs, and the audience just stared at us. It was a strange experience overall. It was about 6 months ago, when Ricky Nelson died in that plane crash in 1985. At the time, everyone thought he was broke. His divorce cost $1 million. He owed money everywhere. His children were about to inherit nothing but debt. Then On May 8, 1940, in Teen, New Jersey, a boy named Ricky Nelson came into this world. His father, AZ, was a famous bandleader, and the settlement amounts were so large that the judge couldn't believe it. However, there was one son who did not receive any of this wealth, and the reason behind this is sure to shock you. Instead of a typical American childhood, Ricky spent much of his formative years in a bustling media industry. Even during his diaper years, his family's radio show, The Adventures of AZ and Harriet, was a national phenomenon. Family dinners became rehearsals, and vacations occasionally became scripts. It was as if Ricky lived in a perpetual spotlight, where everything was scrutinized. Even the most mundane events felt staged. Ricky and his brother David joined the radio show when he was 8 years old in 1949. At the time, most boys his age were into riding bikes or trading baseball cards. Ricky, on the other hand, was busy memorizing lines and cashing paychecks. He became famous before he turned 10. His audiences adored his natural delivery, and he was a household name by the time he was 10. However, fame did not come without its costs. Ricky missed out on class celebrations. No, Ricky didn't get much of a childhood because his playground turned into a studio for the family brand. The family relocated to Los Angeles in 1941 and settled into a picturesque green and white Cape Cod colonial at 1822 Camino Pauro. The house became more than just a home. It became an iconic symbol of American television, appearing in countless episodes and capturing the hearts of fans around the world. Even drove by to catch a glimpse, but inside it was a business. Scripts were written there. Rehearsals were in the living room. AZ ran the show like clockwork, and the kids were part of the crew. Their real lives were inseparable from their on-screen characters. This fusion of reality and fiction helped the show become wildly successful, but it also made Ricky's asthma worse. It wasn't just a few episodes here and there. Behind it all was a lonely kid trying to breathe and feel normal. He was home from school, away from friends, and sometimes out of breath just walking across a room. While other kids were playing, Ricky was indoors, reading or listening to music. This kept him thoughtful and quiet. He observed more than he spoke. This quiet intensity would become part of his charm later on screen. When the show premiered in 1944, AZ and Harriet cast actors to portray their sons. However, Ricky and David were not satisfied with this arrangement and pushed to be cast as themselves by 1949. This was a unique blend of real family life and entertainment, and it was a huge success. The show's ratings skyrocketed, and audiences became enamored with the Nelson family. Ricky was no longer merely portraying a role, he was living it. His private life became widely known and watched. America's first reality family show, airing decades before the genre became popular, was a huge hit with viewers. In 1957, at the age of 17, Ricky performed Fats Domino's "I'm Walking" on the show. The electric performance captivated girls across the country, and the single sold over 1 million copies. Suddenly, Ricky was the poster child for adolescent cool. However, away from the camera, Ricky's life was rapidly devolving into something much more adult-oriented, with parties, fast cars, and fame. Bebop Baby, Ricky's first single with Imperial Records, broke records that year. The single had 750,000 advanced orders before it even hit stores, and when it did, it shot past 1 million. Ricky was charming and wild, polite in interviews, but rebellious behind the scenes. He began to grow sideburns and slick his hair back, tiny rebellions that irritated his parents, who still wanted control. With a debut album that sold over 1 million copies and reached the top 5 on the pop and R&B charts, Ricky went from being a mere teen idol to a major player in the music industry. When his album Ricky topped the charts, record labels began to see financial potential in every attractive and talented adolescent, and Ricky proved them wrong. However, Ricky was also involved in passionate relationships, some of which would have shocked his fans if they had known. One such relationship involved Marianne Gaba, who played. Ricky's on-screen relationship with his girlfriend was intense, but off-screen, things got steamy. He later admitted that they would neck for hours, which was a surefire recipe for scandal in the 1950s. He even gave Marianne a gold ring that said, "Marianne loved Rick," which she took as a sign that they were serious, but Ricky wasn't. He had already moved on to other girls, like singer Lori Collins, with whom he began writing music. The public saw Ricky as innocent, but the truth was that he was a carefree teenager living his best life. He was aware of the truth, and it made his parents, Azzie and Harriet, anxious. Azzie was particularly strict, and even though Ricky was earning $500 per week by the time he was in his mid-teens, his father still kept the money. Ricky received a small allowance because his dad didn't want him to get spoiled. This control extended to his personal life as well. Ricky Nelson's first album, simply titled Ricky, debuted at number 1 in October 1957. Within weeks of its release, it dominated the charts and began to rebel against the pressures of fame and serious relationships. At the age of 17, he was still the face of America's favorite TV family, but he was also increasingly estranged from them. Persisted for 2 weeks atop the Billboard LP chart, making him the youngest artist to ever do so. However, this wasn't simply a case of a teenager singing catchy tunes. Ricky was already a television star thanks to the immensely popular The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Millions of viewers watched him act and sing every week. As Elvis Presley dominated the radio, Ricky was dominating the living rooms and airwaves with songs like Bop Baby and Have I Told You Lately That I Love You climbing the charts. Ricky Nelson's father, Azzie, was the mastermind behind his son's meteoric rise to fame. As the show's producer, Azzie saw an opportunity no one else had. At the conclusion of each episode, Ricky would perform a brand new song. This wasn't just adorable, it was brilliant. 10 million people were tuning in every week, and the exposure was massive. In April 1957, Ricky sang, "I'm Walking," on the show. The song's B-side, "A Teenager's Romance," reached number 2 on the charts and soared to unprecedented heights of popularity. Azzie ensured that Ricky's songs were seamlessly integrated into the plot and maintained strict control over Ricky's appearances. He even forbade him from appearing on The Ed Sullivan Show. Why should they share the spotlight when they could bask in it all? Then, in August 1958, Poor Little Fool became the first song ever to reach the top of Billboard's brand new Hot 100 chart. That would have been enough to make Ricky's name immortal, but there's more. The song was written by Sharon Sheeley, a 15-year-old girl, and Ricky reluctantly recorded it. Despite his objections, the radio stations loved it, and Imperial Records released it anyway. The single shot to number 1, remained there for 2 weeks, and even made it into the country and R&B charts. Ricky's estate continues to profit from the song. In the years between 1957 and 1962, Ricky had 20 singles that peaked in the top 40. Only Elvis had more during that time. His debut single, Bebop Baby, sold over 1 million copies, before it was even released. His contract was equally outrageous, promising $50,000 guaranteed over 5 years in addition to complete creative control over his songs and album artwork. This was unprecedented for a teenager at the time. The money from those hits helped fund his career. Ricky Nelson's wealth and fame were well documented. By 1960, the Ricky Nelson International Fan Club had 9,000 members across the globe. In 1959, he demonstrated his acting chops in Rio Bravo, co-starring with John Wayne and Dean Martin. His portrayal of Colorado Ryan garnered him a Golden Globe nomination for Best Newcomer. However, despite the accolades for his performance, Ricky's extravagant lifestyle was on full display. He was a member of several exclusive clubs and owned expensive custom suits. His role in the film helped propel his career, but it also exposed his penchant for the finer things in life. Fame wasn't merely a source of financial gain, it was also transforming him. Interestingly, one of his biggest hits, Traveling Man, was released in 1961. Sam Cooke initially rejected the song because he didn't think it was a good fit for Ricky, but he took a chance on it and proved everyone wrong. The song peaked at number 1 in April and sold over 100,000 copies. Million copies in a matter of weeks. The B-side, Hello Meryl, also became a hit. Ricky's talent for hearing songs that others overlooked allowed him to score one of his last major successes before his career took a nosedive. However, behind the scenes, he was growing increasingly irritated because the session musicians who had played on his albums for years didn't appreciate rock and roll. Some of them flat out refused to play the way he wanted them to, and one even said, "Kid, this isn't music." Ricky was sick of being treated like a puppet, so he fired them and formed his own band with young musicians who shared his vision. The decision cost him a lot of money in salaries, gear, and travel, but it gave him control. Among his new bandmates was James Burton, who would later become a legendary figure in his own right. The issue wasn't just with the sound, though, it was with respect as well. Despite this, nothing could have prevented the Beatles' 1964 smash hit in the United States. A tidal wave of changes occurred when the group appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in February. By April, they had taken over the top 5 spots on the Billboard chart. Ricky Nelson, who had already achieved fame as a musician when he met Chris Harmon on Christmas Day 1961, was no exception. Elvis, like everyone else, was struggling that year. His song For You barely made it into the top 40. The magic was slipping. Rick, who was 21 years old at the time, was the daughter of football great Tom Harmon and actress Elise Knox, as well as the sister of future TV star Mark Harmon. At first glance, they appeared to be the Hollywood ideal, a beautiful, talented couple who had grown up in the limelight. However, Rick soon found himself in a downward spiral as he struggled to meet the extravagant expectations set by his wealthy father, AZ. They were married on April 20th, 1963, but it wasn't a romantic ceremony. Chris was already pregnant, and her Catholic parents wanted a quick ceremony. Rick, who wasn't Catholic, had to sign a formal pledge promising to raise their kids in the faith. It wasn't his choice, it was a demand. By the late 1970s, Rick's bank account had been drained by his incessant spending on homes, cars, designer clothes, and exotic vacations. The fairy tale had collapsed. I went to Catholic school and did my best to keep the peace. The wedding was supposed to be a joyous occasion, but it turned out to be more about control and putting on a show for the world. Despite this, the pressure to succeed never came. Interestingly, Rick's parents adored Chris. They had rejected all of his previous girlfriends, except for her. They were overjoyed to unite the Nelson and Harmon families. Chris possessed the perfect image. He was well-connected, classy, and descended from Hollywood royalty. Despite Chris's best efforts, Rick's career began to wane in the mid-1970s, and the Bills wanted him home more than ever. As a result, Rick was emotionally and financially stretched thin. The marriage that had once impressed everyone eventually ended with a $1 million legal bill. Rick, who had always adhered to his father's strict financial rules, now had a wife who wanted everything that money could buy. They didn't budget, they just spent. Of Azie and Harriet, she brought in her own money by playing herself on the show, but even with 2 paychecks, they couldn't stop spending. Agents, assistants, and accountants tried to help, but no one could stem the tide of their mounting debt. Rick, who had once adhered to his father's strict financial rules, was now frittering it all away to maintain their lavish lifestyle. Chris, trapped in a fake TV world, felt their marriage crumble, and by this point, they were already too far gone. The Hollywood dream had transformed into a slow-motion financial collapse in 1965. Rick and Chris co-starred in a film called Love and Kisses, which was directed by Rick's father. The plot revolved around 2 teenagers who elope and face challenges living with the groom's parents. The film had a lighthearted plot, but the actors' real-life struggles were evident in the performances. Critics praised the casting, but few noticed how relatable the story was. Chris, who played a high school student despite being 25 years old, received little praise for his role. Rick, desperate to escape his past, formed the Stone Canyon Band in 1969 to reinvent himself by blending country and rock before it was trendy. He recruited Randy Meisner, who would later join the Eagles. The band had potential, but the timing was rough. Azie used the film to play out private issues, putting personal drama on screen in an awkward, uncomfortable, and prophetic way. Rick was determined to prove himself as a serious musician, even though it nearly cost him everything. Meisner quit, saying he was broke and stuck. The albums Rick Sings Nelson and In Concert were groundbreaking, but they failed to sell. Rick was pursuing artistic freedom, while his fame and finances faded. Then, on October 15, 1971, at Madison Square Garden, he performed a rock and roll spectacular. The crowd wanted the old hits, not the new him, so Rick decided to drop the Y from Ricky and try to move forward with a new sound. He played Honky Tonk Women, but the crowd wanted the old hits, so Rick left the stage humiliated and watched the rest of the show from backstage. Eventually, someone convinced him to play the classics, and the audience cheered, but it was too late. In spite of everything that happened that night, Rick managed to pull himself together and write Garden Party in 1972. The song was honest, raw, and personal. The chorus said it all. "You can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself." The song hit number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and went gold, reviving Rick's career for a brief moment. His fans, who had written him off for nearly a decade, were now singing along, but it didn't last. Midway through the 1970s, Rick Nelson's life began to spiral out of control. His marriage to Chris Nelson was crumbling, held together only by appearances. Rick was touring constantly, trying to salvage his career after albums like Windfall failed. He began performing at amusement parks and took on small TV roles. MCA dropped him. Garden Party was both a triumph and a goodbye. Maintained their extravagant lifestyle, private schools, mansions, and mountains of debt, but as Rick's work grew more distant, Chris felt abandoned, and the home they had built became a battleground. In 1977, after another lengthy tour, Rick returned home expecting warmth, but Chris had already moved all of his possessions into a rental house. When he arrived, she was inside with. In 1980, Rick attempted to salvage their broken marriage by purchasing Errol Flynn's former Mulholland Drive mansion from Errol Flynn for $750,000. However, Chris insisted that he give up music and pursue acting instead, and Rick was so overwhelmed by the pressure that he couldn't comply. The two Los Angeles Rams cheerleaders were shocked and humiliated by the revelation. Chris accused Rick of drug abuse and being an unfit father. She said their children would die if she stayed, and Rick fired back, accusing her of alcohol abuse and abandoning the children to the staff. The family was in debt and needed to tour the mansion just to survive. Instead of bringing peace, the haunted rumors increased their stress. The family heard noises, the lights flickered, and the money kept draining out. The dream home turned into a nightmare during the divorce. Rick was ordered to pay $4,000 a month in child support. He had joint custody of his 4 children, ranging in age from 8 to 19, but he was nearly broke from the legal battle. He kept touring night after night to keep up with the payments. The battle dragged on for 5 years, and over $1 million was spent on lawyers alone. Both sides were emotionally devastated, and the children were stuck in the middle, watching as their parents tore each other apart. When it finally ended in 1982, the divorce was final. After years of struggling with his health, low spirits, and a seemingly permanent loss of joy, Rick was ready to make a comeback in 1985. The only catch was that he was terrified of flying, so he bought a 1944 Douglas DC-3 from Jerry Lee Lewis for $118,000, thinking it would be a good way to save money and have some privacy. Unfortunately, the plane was in terrible condition. Rick disregarded everyone's warnings because he needed the money and couldn't cancel shows. In September, an engine failure caused him to miss Faraday Massive, and everyone was afraid of the plane. Guitarist Bobby Neal's wife begged him not to fly on it. Bassist Patrick Woodward had already survived 2 emergency landings. Pianist Andy Chapin was also afraid to board. The plane had been delayed for hours due to another mechanical issue on December 31, 1985, but Rick still got on board. They were headed to Dallas for a New Year's Eve performance. Over Texas, smoke filled the cabin, making it impossible for the pilots to see the instruments. Main pilot Brad Rank had to fly blind, sticking his head out the side window. At around 5:14 p.m., Rick, who was just 45 years old, was killed in the inferno along with 5 other members of his band and crew, including sound technician Donald Clark Russell, the pianist, and his fiancée Helen Blair. The plane was seen to be flying uneventfully and leaving a black smoke trail before it clipped some trees and burst into flames. The debris was spread out over 150 yards. The only people who managed to escape the wreckage were the pilots. Tragically, Rick Nelson, one of the most beloved teenage idols of all time, passed away in a horrific plane crash that required autopsies to determine the identities of the victims. Tragically, Rick's financial situation deteriorated further. He was already engaged to Helen Blair and had 4 children, Tracy, Gunnar, Matthew, and Sam, from a previous marriage to Christian Harmon. However, she, his mother, and his ex-wife were all left out of his will. To make matters worse, the estate was allegedly about $1 million in debt from Rick's spending habits, legal fees, and the cost of maintaining the vintage DC-3 that killed him. For a while, it was believed that Rick had died without a will. His ex-wife even threatened to seize control of the estate if she couldn't find one. However, everything changed when Rick's brother David Nelson produced a will that was dated only 4 months prior to the crash. This will named only. David was named executive and Rick's 4 children were named heirs, but with so many deaths, it was unclear what, if anything, would remain to inherit. Kristen took the situation very personally, trying to collect on some of Rick's life insurance even though they were divorced. The legal battle quickly became ugly as accusations of drug use, poor parenting, and financial irresponsibility surfaced, some spanning years. Over $1 million was at stake. Rick's brief affair with George and Crew in 1980 resulted in the birth of his son, Eric Jude Crew. Initially, Rick denied paternity, but a court-ordered blood test in 1981 proved otherwise. Reportedly, he stopped paying the $400 monthly child support after a while. In his will, Rick claimed paternity was. The will was upheld by the court, leaving Eric out entirely. After Rick passed away, Jean fought for his share of the estate, but the court sided with Jean and her son. Meanwhile, a wrongful death lawsuit was filed by Helen Blair's parents, who blamed poor maintenance for the plane crash and sought compensation for the other passengers' families. Additional lawsuits ensued, with creditors claiming responsibility. Guy fought for Eric's rights, while Kristen fought for insurance money. The estate appeared to be in disarray. Like a sinking ship with too many hands grabbing for scraps, Rick's true wealth lay in his music catalog and royalties, particularly from digital formats like streaming. The problem was that record labels were stealthily taking it. In 2011, the Nelson estate sued Capitol Records for $100 to $250 million. The lawsuit accused Capitol of concealing unmatched income money. Capitol was underpaying Rick's estate on digital sales and using illogical deductions, such as applying breakage fees meant for physical CDs or vinyl to digital downloads, which the estate claimed amounted to fraud. Capitol also refused to provide full audit data, leaving Rick's heirs in the dark about how much they were rightfully owed. The case was finally settled in 2014, with Capitol agreeing to pay in. The legal team hailed it as a monumental triumph, but that wasn't all. In 2020, the estate retaliated against Sony Music, this time with an eye on global streaming. This time, Sony was alleged to have reduced royalties by imposing intercomp fees, which meant that Sony's internal offices were charging each other and reducing payouts. As a result, as much as 68% of royalties were lost before Rick's estate finally saw a. The settlement was a whopping $12.7 million, with a 36% increase expected in future streaming royalties. Rick's children have begun to reap the financial benefits of their father's estate.